Welcome to the video for Lesson 3 of the Turn the Lights On curriculum. This lesson introduces the concepts of chemical energy and how chemical energy is used in thermal power plants to generate electricity. In this video, this lesson is more activity-based, so the activity video for this lesson will have more details. Here, we will just go step by step through the lesson. At the end of this lesson, students will be able to describe how thermal power plants use chemical energy to get electrical energy, analyze experimental data to identify if a chemical or physical change has happened, and recognize that chemical reactions absorb or release thermal energy. So in the introduction, we will look at concepts related to chemical energy and fossil fuels. The activities will be based on understanding the nature of chemical reactions and energy transformations, and the assessment section will focus not only on how students understand the content, but also the skill of conducting scientific inquiry. This lesson can be completed in 3 50-minute class periods, so let's get started with the introduction part of the lesson. The two main concepts in this lesson are the chemical energy and the fossil fuels. Students will understand how fuels are generated from the remains of prehistoric creatures and plants, which are fossil fuels. The stored energy of the fuel is released through chemical interactions. Through several experiments, students will apply the concepts of physical and chemical change and relate them to the thermal energy stored in the substances. However, we will also revisit the engineering design process from the previous lessons and see how learning these new concepts can help us move along in the design process. We will look at chemical energy and fossil fuels in detail. For an introduction to chemical energy, watch the video given in the curriculum. If you want, you can also pause the video now and watch that video. The link is below. Assess where your students are in their knowledge about chemical energy. Based on your experiences in teaching chemistry classes, you can spend additional time reviewing the concepts, which students usually have a difficult time understanding. After watching the video, go over the concepts related to how chemical energy is stored in various substances, the difference between physical and chemical changes, characteristics of chemical changes such as the rate of reaction, the use of catalysts, temperature changes, etc., and finally discuss the concept of combustion as a type of chemical change. Notice how these concepts are organized in a way that students can learn to apply things they learn in chemistry while working on an engineering project in this curriculum. You will see that this organization is also mirrored in the activities you will do in this lesson. Help students see these connections so that they can see real-world applications of their science lessons. In this case, the application of chemical energy is seen in the first available electrical generating plant for their design, a fossil fuel power plant. For an introduction to fossil fuels, watch the video given in the curriculum. If you want, you can also pause here and watch that video. The link to that video is below. This curriculum might provide students with information about fossil fuels that goes beyond what they already know. It is likely that your students have learned about fossil fuels before or heard about them. Ask students what they know about fossil fuels and use this discussion to highlight the role of fossil fuels in electricity generation. This discussion can be closed by touching on the topic of the effects of using fossil fuels and alternatives used for electricity generation. These topics will help students understand how this lesson connects between the previous lessons and the future lessons in this unit. Write down the interesting points from the closing discussion on fossil fuels. These points can be used to remind students of this discussion and as a starting point for upcoming lessons. The activities in this lesson will focus on understanding different aspects of chemical energy through 4 different experiments. In this video, we will only look at the pedagogical aspects of these activities. For the step-by-step video of how to conduct these activities, you can check the activity video for this lesson. The link for the activity video is below. The 4 activities are related to characterizing materials, physical and chemical changes, speed of reactions, and the soda can engine. If you want, you can pause this video and watch part 1 of the activity video of this curriculum. The link is below. This is a simple activity where students will only look at the materials and use worksheet 2A to write down the observable properties of the materials. However, there is a chance that this activity might become a mechanical task, or where students might change their answers so that they match up with the rest of the group. To avoid this, you can encourage students to write down the unique characteristics that they observe in the materials. You can tell them how each member of an engineering design team brings in a different perspective. And so, If all of them write down their own unique observations, they will eventually learn more about each material as a team than if they had studied it on their own. This next experiment is covered in part 2 of the activity video. Again, feel free to pause and go watch that activity before we move on. Explain to students what physical and chemical changes are and remind them that we can use some clues to differentiate them from observation. For example, chemical changes typically imply color change, production of an odor, change of temperature, formulation of bubbles, or formation of solids. A physical change does not change the properties of the original item. As an example, a physical change is like folding a piece of paper. It changes size and shape, but it is still the same sheet of paper. You can perform these experiments in front of the full class or allow the students to perform the experiments in teams and ask them if a chemical or physical change has happened and why they know. Based on your experience in the science classrooms, if you feel that there are certain points where students are unable to correctly identify a physical or chemical reaction, you can also conduct additional experiments under this activity to clarify these points. These next experiments are covered in part 3 of the activity video. You can pause and watch part 3 now from the link below if you'd like. You will look at various aspects of chemical reactions, such as speed of the reaction, the role of catalysts, temperature changes, and thermal energy, and finally combustion. Similar to the previous experiments, you can perform these in front of the full class or allow students to perform the experiments in teams. As mentioned previously, the sequence of these experiments can help your students link these experiments back to our engineering design problem of fossil fuel power plants and power generation. This final experiment is covered in part 4 of the activity video. Again, pause and watch part 4 right now if you would like in the link below. Whether you do this experiment in front of the whole class or have each team perform it, the purpose of this activity is to get students thinking about the different forms of energy. When the setup is ready, you can ask students to predict what will happen and why. Then, after performing the actual experiment, you can discuss the predictions and whether they were accurate or not. It is important that students understand the intermediate steps in the energy transformations that happen during this experiment. You can then connect the idea of combustion to the fossil fuel power plants and discuss how energy transformations take place during the process of electricity generation. At the end of this lesson, review the terminology students learned in this lesson. Lead a class discussion about the difference between physical and chemical changes, how we can differentiate them, and how we use chemical changes to get energy. To conclude the lesson, tell students that in this lesson we have learned a little bit about chemical energy and how it is used in fossil fuel power plants. In the next lesson, we're going to learn about another energy that we can use in our power generation system. Before moving on, take some time now and plan how you will implement Lesson 3, especially the activities and experiments, with your students. Take notes in your curriculum document about things you want to remember, and perhaps add information about timestamps from this video that may help you later when you want to review. When you are ready, proceed to the Lesson 4 video.